Her fiancé left her because she was fat, but she married her fiancé's billionaire CEO. He called off the wedding because she didn't fit his public image. But she didn't just move on, she upgraded. Do you believe people only fall in love with looks, or is there still hope for real love in today's world? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire someone. She was caramel-skinned with deep-set hazel eyes, soft, full lips, and a laugh that could warm the coldest heart. Her name? Nova Jordan. She works at a design firm. Nova wasn't just skilled, she was unforgettable. But to Dylan Reeves, her fiancé of 2 years, she was a stepping stone. When Dylan cruelly broke off their engagement just weeks before the wedding, blaming her weight and lack of social appeal, Nova's world shattered. But she didn't crawl into a hole. She showed up. She glowed up. And in a twist fate must have smiled upon, she caught the eye of the one man Dylan secretly feared most, his boss and the company's billionaire CEO, Knox Harrington. This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about finding self-worth, embracing growth, and falling deeply, unexpectedly, in love. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. Before we begin, let me say something really personal to me right now. We spend hours making these videos and hope that they reach a lot of people around the world. One of my goals is to share valuable lessons about love, humility, and kindness so we can have a better world. I would be glad to know that these lessons get to people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from. Thank you for joining this growing community. Let us begin. Nova stood in the middle of the crowded rooftop restaurant, her champagne flute trembling in her hand. The city skyline glittered below, a dazzling sprawl of lights that seemed to mock her unraveling life. She'd spent hours getting ready, curling her hair, slipping into the emerald dress that hugged her curves, the one Dylan had once said made her look like a goddess. Tonight was supposed to be their engagement party, the night she'd dreamed of since he'd slid that diamond ring onto her finger 6 months ago. But now the air felt thick, suffocating, as every eye in the room turned toward her. Dylan stood a few feet away, his tailored suit pristine, his jaw set like he'd rehearsed this moment. The murmurs of their friends and family faded into a dull hum as he cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the haze like a blade. "I can't do this anymore, Nova," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. His tone was ice-cold, devoid of the warmth she'd once clung to. "You don't fit the image I need. Look at yourself." The words hit her like a punch to the chest, stealing her breath. She glanced down at her reflection in the polished floor, her soft hips, her rounded arms, the body she'd spent years learning to accept. Her eyes snapped back to him, searching his face for a trace of the man who'd whispered promises in her ear under the stars. But all she saw was a stranger, his lips curled in a faint sneer. "I thought I was marrying someone who loved me for me," she said, her voice shaking but rising above the stunned silence. "Not some polished trophy you could parade around." A ripple of gasps spread through the crowd. Dylan's best friend, Carter, shifted uncomfortably by the bar, his drink frozen halfway to his mouth. Nova's sister, Yasmin, stood near the edge of the group, her fists clenched, eyes blazing with fury she hadn't yet unleashed. But Dylan didn't flinch. He adjusted his cufflinks, a deliberate move that screamed indifference. "Love's not enough when you're building an empire," he said, his gaze sweeping over her like she was a flawed prototype he'd decided to discard. "I need a partner who matches the vision, and you've let yourself go." The room tilted. Nova's grip tightened on the glass, her knuckles whitening. She wanted to scream, to hurl the champagne in his face, to demand how he could reduce her to a number on a scale after 3 years together. But her throat closed up, trapping the words inside. She felt the weight of every stare, pity from some, judgment from others, and a few smirks from the women who'd always envied her place at Dylan's side. "Dylan, "Don't do this here," Carter muttered, stepping forward, his voice low but urgent. "Take it private, man." "No," Dylan snapped, his eyes still locked on Nova. "She needs to hear it. Everyone does. I'm done pretending." Pretending? The word clawed at her. Had it all been a lie? The late-night talks, the trips to his family's lake house, the way he'd traced her curves with reverence. Her mind raced, replaying every moment, searching for cracks she'd missed. She'd gained weight over the past year, sure. Stress from her job at the design firm, the endless planning for a wedding he'd insisted be perfect. But he'd never said a word. Not until now, when he'd chosen the most public stage to shred her apart. Yasmin pushed through the crowd, her heels clicking against the floor like gunfire. "You're a coward," she spat, planting herself between Nova and Dylan. "You don't get to humiliate her like this and walk away clean." Dylan barely glanced at her. "Stay out of it, Yasmin. This isn't your fight." "It's my sister," Yasmin shot back, her voice trembling with rage. "You don't get to decide what's mine." Nova reached for Yasmin's arm, her touch shaky but firm. "Stop," she whispered, though her eyes never left Dylan. "Let him finish." Because she needed to hear it, all of it. Every ugly truth he'd been hiding behind his charming smiles and expensive gifts. She needed to know how deep the betrayal ran. Dylan exhaled sharply, like he was annoyed she was still standing there. "I've got a deal closing next month, biggest of my career. Investors, press, the whole circus. I can't have—" He gestured vaguely at her, his hand slicing through the air. "This. It's not the look I need. The look. Not the person. Not the woman who'd stayed up with him through sleepless nights, brainstorming pitches for his tech startup. Not the one who'd laughed at his terrible cooking attempts or held him when his father's death left him hollow. Just a look." "So that's it?" Nova said, her voice steadier now, though her chest ached like it might cave in. 3 years and I'm just— what? A liability? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was louder than any words he could have thrown at her. He turned, signaling to Carter with a flick of his head, and started toward the exit. The crowd parted for him, a sea of designer dresses and suits swallowing him up like he was some untouchable king. "Wait," Nova called, her voice cracking through the tension. He paused, half turning, his expression impatient. "The ring." She yanked it off her finger, the diamond glinting under the rooftop lights. For a moment she considered throwing it, watching it sail over the edge and disappear into the city below. But instead she stepped forward, her heels echoing in the hush, and pressed it into his palm. His fingers closed around it, and she saw the flicker of something. Regret, maybe, or just surprise. Then it was gone. "Keep your empire," she said, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. "I hope it's worth it." He didn't respond. He just walked away, Carter trailing behind him, casting one last apologetic glance her way. The glass door swung shut, and the room erupted into whispers, a storm of voices picking apart what they'd just witnessed. Nova stood there, rooted to the spot, the weight of her own words sinking in. Yasmin grabbed her hand, tugging her toward the edge of the rooftop, away from the prying eyes. "You didn't deserve that," Yasmin said, her voice thick with emotion. "He's a bastard, Nova, a shallow, spineless bastard." Nova nodded absently, staring out at the city. The lights blurred as tears welled up, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry, not here, not for him. Not yet. "I thought he loved me," she said, almost to herself. "How did I not see this coming?" Yasmin squeezed her hand. "Because you're not a monster. You don't think like he does." But that wasn't true, was it? Nova's mind was already spinning, replaying every glance, every offhand comment Dylan had made over the past few months. The way he'd started pulling away, working late, canceling plans, brushing off her questions with that tight-lipped smile. There had been signs. She'd just chosen to ignore them, clinging to the fairy tale she'd built in her head. A woman in a sleek black dress approached, her lips pursed in a sympathetic frown. "Nova, honey, are you okay? That was brutal." Nova forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be fine. Thanks." The woman hesitated, then drifted back into the crowd, leaving Nova with Yasmin and the gnawing ache in her gut. She wasn't fine. She was a wreck, humiliated, abandoned, and furious in a way she couldn't yet name. But beneath it all, something else flickered. A spark. A question. What now? She didn't have an answer, not tonight, not with the sting of Dylan's words still burning in her ears. But as she stood there, the cool night air brushing her skin, she felt the first stirrings of something dangerous. Not defeat, not surrender, something sharper, hungrier. Yasmin tugged at her arm again. "Let's get out of here. You don't need to face these vultures." Nova nodded, letting her sister lead her toward the elevator. But as they stepped inside and the doors slid shut, cutting off the buzz of the party, her mind wouldn't stop racing. Dylan thought he'd broken her. He thought she'd crumble without him, fade into the background of his glittering life. He was wrong. The elevator hummed downward, and Nova caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Tear-streaked, yes, but her jaw was set, her eyes hard. She didn't know what came next, but one thing was clear. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. And somewhere out there, beyond the wreckage of this night, a twist was waiting, one Dylan would never see coming. Have you ever been judged based on appearance? How did you deal with it? Let's talk about it below. The elevator doors slid open, spilling Nova and Yasmin into the lobby of the high-rise. The marble floor gleamed under the chandelier's glow, but the elegance felt hollow, a cruel echo of the night's collapse. Nova's heels clicked unevenly as she followed Yasmin toward the revolving doors, her mind still trapped on that rooftop. Dylan's voice looped in her head. "You don't fit the image I need," each syllable a fresh wound. She pressed a hand to her chest as if she could physically hold herself together. Outside, the city buzzed with late-night energy, taxis honking, neon signs flashing, but it all blurred into static. Yasmin flagged down a cab, her movements sharp and decisive, like she was waging war against the universe on Nova's behalf. "Get in," Yasmin said, holding the door open. "We're going to my place. You're not sleeping alone tonight." Nova slid into the back seat, the leather cold against her skin. "I don't want to talk about it," she murmured, staring out the window as the cab pulled away. "You don't have to," Yasmin replied, her voice softer now, though her eyes still burned. "But you're not shutting me out either." The ride passed in silence, the city lights streaking past like fragments of a life Nova no longer recognized. By the time they reached Yasmin's apartment, exhaustion had settled into her bones, but sleep felt impossible. She collapsed onto the couch, kicking off her shoes, while Yasmin disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later, she returned with 2 mugs of chamomile tea, pressing one into Nova's hands. "Drink," Yasmin ordered, sinking into the armchair across from her. "And don't argue." Nova took a sip, the warmth doing little to thaw the ice in her chest. "He didn't even hesitate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just cut me loose, like I was nothing." Yasmin leaned forward, her mug cradled between her palms. "He's the one who's nothing, a hollow shell chasing a paycheck and a photo op. You're better than that, Nova." "Am I?" Nova's laugh was brittle, jagged. "I gave him everything. 3 years, my heart, my trust, and he just threw it away." "Then take it back," Yasmin said fiercely. "Take yourself back. He doesn't get to define you." Nova stared into her tea, the steam curling upward like a ghost of the confidence she'd lost. She wanted to believe Yasmin, wanted to claw her way out of this pit, but all she could feel was the weight of Dylan's rejection, pressing down until she could barely breathe. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Yasmin's curtains, harsh and unrelenting. Nova dragged herself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. Her reflection stared back, puffy eyes, tangled hair, a woman she didn't recognize. She gripped the sink, forcing herself to stand taller. Work. She had to go to work. The design firm wouldn't wait, and she couldn't afford to fall apart, not when her career was the one thing Dylan hadn't touched. She dressed in a hurry, pulling on a navy blazer and slacks, and left before Yasmin could stop her with another pep talk. The office was a flurry of deadlines and chatter when she arrived, her desk buried under sketches and fabric swatches. She threw herself into it, sketching patterns with a ferocity that bordered on desperation. If she could just focus, maybe the ache would fade. But it didn't. Every quiet moment brought Dylan's voice crashing back, his sneer etched into her memory. She'd catch herself staring at her hands, wondering when they'd stopped being enough. Her co-worker, Lila, noticed the shift, her clipped responses, the way she flinched at sudden noises. "You okay?" Lila asked one afternoon, leaning against Nova's desk with a coffee in hand. "You've been off." Nova forced a smile, the muscles in her face protesting. "Just tired. Big project." Lila didn't buy it, but she didn't push. "Well, don't burn out. We need you for that leadership retreat next week." The retreat. Nova had forgotten about it. A mandatory getaway hosted by the firm's elusive CEO. She'd been dreading the forced bonding, but now it felt like a lifeline. A chance to escape the city, the memories, the suffocating pity in everyone's eyes. Yasmin cornered her that night, arms crossed as Nova packed a suitcase. "You sure you're up for this? You don't have to pretend you're fine." "I'm not pretending," Nova lied, folding a sweater with more force than necessary. "I need to keep moving. Work's all I've got left." Yasmin's expression softened. "It's not all you've got. You've got me, and you've got you. Don't forget that. Heal, Nova. Grow. Don't let him steal that too." Nova paused, Yasmin's words sinking in. Healing sounded impossible, but growth? Maybe. She zipped the suitcase shut, a flicker of resolve igniting beneath the pain. "I'll try," she said, meeting her sister's gaze. "That's all I can promise." The retreat was held at a sprawling lodge nestled in the mountains, all glass walls and cedar beams. Nova arrived with the rest of the team, her breath catching at the crisp air and endless sky. It was beautiful, a stark contrast to the chaos she'd left behind. She threw herself into the workshops, scribbling notes on leadership strategies and team dynamics, anything to keep her mind occupied. But the hurt lingered, a quiet ache she couldn't shake. On the second night, a formal dinner was held in the lodge's grand hall. Nova sat at a round table near the back, picking at her salmon, when a shadow fell across her plate. She looked up, startled, to find a man settling into the chair beside her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back and eyes that seemed to see straight through her. Knox Sterling, the CEO. She'd seen his face in company emails, cold, commanding, untouchable, but never this close. He didn't smile, didn't offer small talk. He just watched her, his fork poised over his plate like he was dissecting her instead of the food. The table fell silent, the others too intimidated to break the tension. "You're the only one who hasn't asked me for a raise or a favor," he said at last, his voice low and smooth, edged with something she couldn't place. "I like that." Nova blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't know we were allowed to ask." A faint smirk tugged at his lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Most don't wait for permission." She studied him, her pulse quickening. There was no warmth in his demeanor, just a calculated curiosity that made her feel exposed. "Maybe I don't want anything from you," she said, surprised by her own boldness. Knox raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. Everyone wants something. You're just better at hiding it. The words stung, too close to Dylan's betrayal for comfort. She set her fork down, her appetite gone. Not everyone's playing a game. Aren't they? He countered, his gaze unwavering. You're here, aren't you? Fighting to prove something. To someone. Her breath hitched. How could he know? She hadn't told anyone about Dylan, not here. But Knox's eyes held a quiet intensity, like he'd already mapped out her scars. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. He wasn't wrong. She was fighting, to reclaim herself, to bury the humiliation. But admitting it to him, this stranger with a billionaire's arrogance, felt like handing over a piece of her soul. I'm here to do my job, she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm inside. That's all. Knox tilted his head, considering her. We'll see. He turned back to his meal, the conversation over as abruptly as it began. The table resumed its chatter, but Nova's mind raced. Who was he to judge her? And why did she care? She pushed her plate away, the encounter leaving her unsettled. There was something about him, his detachment, his piercing scrutiny, that rattled her in a way Dylan never had. Later, as she stood on the lodge's balcony overlooking the moonlit valley, Yasmin's words echoed back. Heal. Grow. Knox's challenge lingered too. Everyone wants something. Did she? She'd come here to escape, to rebuild, but now she wasn't sure what she was chasing. The night air bit at her skin and she wrapped her arms around herself, a shiver running through her. Below, she caught a glimpse of Knox stepping outside, a phone pressed to his ear. His voice was too low to hear, but his posture was tense, commanding. He glanced up, his eyes locking with hers for a fleeting moment before he turned away, disappearing into the shadows. Nova's stomach twisted. She didn't trust him, his wealth, his power, the way he saw through her defenses. But she couldn't deny the pull, the nagging sense that this encounter wasn't random. Something was shifting, a thread she couldn't yet grasp. And as she stood there, alone under the vast sky, she realized the question wasn't just what she wanted. It was what Knox saw in her, and what he might do with it. Nova lingered on the balcony, the mountain air sharp against her skin as Knox vanished into the shadows below. His brief glance upward clung to her thoughts like a splinter, unsettling, deliberate, impossible to ignore. She gripped the railing, her breath fogging in the cool night. What was he after? She didn't trust the way he dissected her with a few words, peeling back layers she hadn't even shown her closest friends. And yet, a part of her, a reckless, curious part, wanted to know why he'd bothered. The retreat blurred by after that. Workshops, team exercises, forced laughter over coffee, all of it felt distant, overshadowed by that fleeting exchange. She caught glimpses of Knox throughout, always at the edges, barking orders into his phone, scribbling notes during presentations, his presence a quiet command that bent the room around him. He didn't speak to her again, but she felt his gaze more than once, a weight that made her skin prickle. Back in the city, Nova threw herself into routine. The design firm buzzed with deadlines, and she buried her pain in fabric swatches and late-night sketches. Yasmin checked in daily, her texts a lifeline Nova clung to, even as she dodged the deeper conversations. "You're stronger than you think," Yasmin wrote one night, and Nova stared at the words until her eyes blurred, wanting to believe them. But Dylan's betrayal still haunted her. She'd see his face in strangers on the subway, hear his voice in the hum of the office printer. She'd blocked his number, deleted his photos, but the humiliation clung like damp cloth. Work became her shield, each completed project a brick in the wall she built around herself. Then, one Tuesday morning, everything shifted. She was hunched over her desk, tweaking a layout for a client's spring collection, when a shadow fell across her screen. She looked up, expecting Lila or a courier. Instead, Knox Sterling stood there, hands in his pockets, his dark eyes scanning her workspace with that same unreadable intensity from the retreat. "Morning," he said, his voice low, cutting through the office din like a blade through silk. Nova straightened, her pen freezing mid-stroke. "Mr. Sterling, I didn't know you. Visited the design floor." "I don't," he replied, stepping closer. He picked up one of her sketches, a flowing dress in muted gold, and studied it, his fingers tracing the lines she'd labored over. "This is good, better than good." Her pulse quickened, a mix of pride and unease. "Thank you. It's for the Harper account." He set the sketch down, his gaze locking onto hers. "You've got an eye for detail. Most people here just churn out what sells. You're different." The compliment landed awkwardly, too personal for the sterile office air. She shifted in her chair, unsure how to respond. "I just try to see what others don't." Knox's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "That's why I'm here." Before she could ask what he meant, he pulled a chair from a nearby desk and sat, uninvited but utterly at ease. The team around her went quiet, their typing slowing as they stole glances at the CEO slumming it on their floor. "I'm working on something," he said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "A project, off the books for now. I need someone who thinks beyond the obvious. You in?" Nova blinked, her mind racing. "I don't even know what it is." "You will," he said, his tone clipped but laced with a challenge. "Say yes, and we'll talk details tomorrow. My office, 9 sharp." He didn't wait for an answer. He stood, adjusted his cuffs, and walked away, leaving her staring at the empty space he'd occupied. Whispers erupted around her, Lila mouthing, "What was that?" from across the room. But Nova barely heard them. Her chest tightened, a cocktail of dread and intrigue swirling inside. Knox Sterling didn't chase people. He summoned them. So why her? The next morning she arrived at his office, a glass-walled fortress on the top floor. He was already there, standing by the window, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he'd conquered. He didn't turn when she entered, just gestured to a chair. "Sit," he said. "We're designing a campaign, luxury, exclusive, raw, not the polished garbage we usually sell. I want your input." Nova hesitated, then sat, clutching her notebook like a shield. "Why me? You've got senior designers with decades on me." Knox finally faced her, his expression unyielding. "Because you're real. You don't kiss ass or fake it. I've seen your work, and I've seen you. That retreat, you didn't grovel. You didn't even flinch." She swallowed, his words slicing too close to the bone. "Maybe I was just too tired to play along. Or maybe you've got something worth betting on," he countered, crossing the room to lean against his desk. "So, are you in?" She met his gaze, searching for a trap. There was none she could see, just a man who seemed to see her in a way no one else had. Not even Dylan. "Yeah," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm in." From there, Knox became a fixture in her world. He'd appear without warning, at her desk, in the break room, once even at the fabric warehouse where she was sourcing materials. Each time he'd ask questions, poke at her ideas, push her to dig deeper. "What's the story here?" he'd say, holding up a sketch. "Not the sales pitch, the soul." She'd fumble at first, then find her footing, her answers sharpening with every encounter. He was cold, yes, but not cruel. Observant in a way that unnerved her, like he was cataloging her every move. Yet there was a spark in his challenges, a quiet respect she hadn't expected. She started looking forward to his visits, though she'd never admit it. Not to Yasmin, not even to herself. One afternoon, she was alone in the conference room, pinning swatches to a board when Knox strode in. He didn't announce himself, just watched her work, his silence heavier than words. You're good at this, he said finally, stepping closer. Not just the design. The way you see things, people, moments. It's rare. Nova paused, a pin between her fingers. You don't even know me. Don't I? He replied, his voice low, almost teasing. You're not as guarded as you think. Her breath caught, a flush creeping up her neck. She turned back to the board, focusing on the fabric to hide her unease. Maybe you're just too good at guessing. Or maybe you're worth figuring out, he said. And there it was, that edge again, the one that made her wonder what he really wanted. Before she could respond, the door swung open. Dylan stood there, his suit pristine, his face a mask of casual confidence that faltered when he saw Knox. Nova froze, the pin slipping from her hand to clatter on the floor. Dylan, she said, her voice a brittle thread. What are you doing here? He ignored her, his eyes narrowing at Knox. Sterling, didn't expect to see you slumming it with the staff. Knox didn't flinch, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. Didn't expect to see you sniffing around my company. What's your play, Reed? Dylan's jaw tightened, a flicker of jealousy breaking through his cool facade. Just checking on an old investment. Nova and I go way back. Back's where you left her, Knox said, his tone flat but cutting. She's moved on. Nova's heart pounded, caught between the two men, one who'd discarded her, one who seemed to see her too clearly. Dylan's gaze slid to her, lingering on her curves, her face like he was reassessing what he'd thrown away. You're looking different, he said, his voice laced with something she couldn't name, regret maybe, or just spite. Working late with the boss now. Working, she snapped, stepping forward, her anger flaring. Something you wouldn't understand. Dylan smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sure. Just don't get too comfortable. Knox doesn't keep people around long. Funny, Knox said, moving to stand beside Nova, his presence a quiet wall. I was about to say the same about you. The air crackled thick with unspoken history and new stakes. Dylan lingered a moment longer, then turned on his heel and left, the door slamming shut behind him. Nova exhaled, her hands trembling as she bent to retrieve the fallen pin. You okay? Knox asked, his voice softer now, though his eyes still held that piercing edge. Yeah, she lied, straightening. He's just a ghost I can't shake. Knox studied her, then nodded. Ghosts fade. You're stronger than he thinks. She wanted to believe him, but Dylan's sudden reappearance gnawed at her. Why now? Was it jealousy or something more? And Knox, his interest, his quiet defense. Was it strategy or something real? She didn't know, but as he returned to the swatches, brushing her arm as he passed, she felt the ground shift beneath her. The game had changed, and she wasn't sure whose move came next. Nova stood in the conference room, the pin still trembling in her hand, as Dylan's footsteps faded down the hall. The door's slam echoed, a punctuation mark to the chaos he'd left behind. Knox lingered beside her, his presence steady but inscrutable, the faint brush of his arm against hers lingering like a question she couldn't answer. She turned to the swatches, forcing her focus back to the fabric, but her mind churned. Dylan's smirk, his barbed words, the jealousy flickering in his eyes. What was he doing here, in her space, after months of silence? Knox broke the quiet, his voice low and deliberate. He's not worth the headspace. You know that, right? She glanced at him, his dark eyes locked on her with that unnerving clarity. I'm trying to, she said, her voice tighter than she intended. But he's got a way of sticking around, like a stain you can't scrub out. Knox's lips twitched, a rare hint of amusement. Then overwrite him. He didn't press, just stepped back, giving her room to breathe. Finish this up. We'll review tomorrow. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the hum of the overhead lights and the storm in her chest. The next few days blurred into a rhythm. Knox's unexpected visits, her growing confidence in their project, the quiet thrill of his approval. He'd lean over her sketches, challenging her choices, but there was a respect in his tone she hadn't expected from a man who ruled an empire. She caught herself watching him too, his sharp jaw, the way his hands moved with precision, the rare moments his guard slipped. It wasn't attraction, not exactly. It was something deeper, a pull she couldn't name. But Dylan's shadow loomed. She'd spot him in the lobby one morning, chatting with a junior exec, his laugh too loud, too forced. Another day, he lingered by the elevator as she stepped out, his eyes tracking her with a hunger that made her skin crawl. He didn't approach, not yet, but his presence was a taunt, a reminder of the life he'd shredded. Friday came, and Nova stayed late, tweaking a mock-up in the empty office. The city glittered beyond the windows, a restless pulse against the quiet. She was lost in her work when the door creaked open. She looked up, expecting Knox. Instead, Dylan stood there, his tie loosened, a bottle of scotch in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. "Thought you might need a drink," he said, stepping inside without invitation. His voice was smooth, practiced, like he'd rehearsed this moment. Nova's stomach twisted, her pen clattering to the desk. "Get out," she said, the words sharp and immediate. He didn't move, just set the bottle and glasses down, his smirk faltering but not fading. "Come on, Nova, we need to talk." "There's nothing to say," she snapped, standing to put the desk between them. "You made that clear on the rooftop." Dylan's eyes flickered, a crack in his composure. "I messed up, okay? Seeing you with Sterling, it's got me thinking." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed off the walls. "Thinking? That's new for you." He flinched, but pressed on, leaning against the desk like he still owned the space. "I'm serious. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. You're different now. Stronger. I miss that." Her chest tightened, rage and disbelief colliding. "You don't get to miss me," she said, stepping closer, her voice low and firm. "You don't get to discard people and come back when it's convenient." Dylan straightened, his jaw tightening. "I didn't discard you, I had a vision, Nova. A plan. You didn't fit it then, but you do now." She stared at him, the audacity of it sinking in. "Fit it? I'm not a puzzle piece, Dylan. I'm a person. And you didn't want me. You wanted a prop." "That's not true," he shot back, his voice rising. "I loved you. I still—" "Stop," she cut in, her hand slashing through the air. "You loved the idea of me, the version you could control, but this?" She gestured to herself, her curves, her defiance. "This scared you off, and now you're jealous because someone else sees what you couldn't." His eyes darkened, the mention of Knox hitting a nerve. "You were never meant for someone like him," he said, his tone edged with venom. "Sterling's a shark. He'll chew you up and spit you out." "Maybe," she said, her gaze unwavering. "But at least he's not a coward who runs when things get real." Dylan froze, her words landing like a blow. For a moment he looked small, smaller than she'd ever seen him, stripped of his polished armor. Then he recovered, his smirk sliding back into place, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're making a mistake," he said, grabbing the scotch and glasses. "You'll see." He turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. Nova sank into her chair, her hands shaking as adrenaline drained away. She'd shut him down, finally, fully. But the victory felt hollow. His regret was real, she could see it, but it wasn't about her. It was about losing, about Knox winning a game she hadn't even known they were playing. The office was silent now, save for the hum of the city beyond. She stared at her mock-up, the lines blurring as her mind raced. Dylan's return wasn't closure. It was a crack, a fault line threatening to pull her back into his orbit. And Knox? What was he to her? A mentor, a spark, Or just another man with an agenda? Footsteps broke her reverie. She tensed, half expecting Dylan again, but it was Knox who stepped through the door, his coat slung over one arm. He paused, taking in her expression, the tension still clinging to her. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice calm but probing. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Just an old ghost. It's handled." He nodded, but his eyes lingered, searching. "Good. You don't need distractions." He moved to the desk, peering at her mock-up. "This is sharp," he said, tracing a curve with his finger. "Bold. You're getting better." The praise warmed her, a flicker of light in the dark. "Thanks. I'm trying to overwrite some things." Knox glanced at her, a rare softness in his gaze. "You already are." He didn't push, didn't pry, just set his coat down and pulled up a chair. They worked in silence, the late hour stretching out, and for the first time in days, Nova felt steady. Dylan's regret was his burden, not hers. And Knox, whatever he was, saw her, not the shadow she'd been. But as they pored over the designs, a question gnawed at her. Dylan's jealousy, Knox's interest. Was it coincidence? Or something more? She didn't have answers, not yet. But the fault lines were shifting, and she wasn't the same woman who'd stood broken on that rooftop. The game wasn't over, and this time she'd play on her terms. Nova leaned back in her chair, the mock-up glowing on the desk between her and Knox, as the city hummed beyond the office windows. The silence between them was comfortable, a rare respite after Dylan's intrusion. Knox's presence, steady, unyielding, grounded her, his focus on the design a quiet anchor in the storm of her thoughts. She stole a glance at him, his sharp profile softened by the dim light, and wondered again what drove him. He'd seen her through Dylan's jab, offered no judgment, just space to breathe. It was more than she'd expected from a man like him. "Add a slit here," he said, breaking the quiet, his finger tapping the sketch. "It'll move better, less static." She nodded, jotting a note. "Good call. I was too locked in on the silhouette." He smirked faintly, a flicker of warmth in his cool demeanor. "That's why I keep you around." The words hung there, light but loaded, and she felt a flush creep up her neck. She turned back to the design, hiding it, but the air had shifted, subtle, electric. They worked another hour, the night deepening outside, until Knox stood, stretching his shoulders with a rare hint of fatigue. "Call it," he said, grabbing his coat. "You've earned a break." She smiled, small but genuine. "You too. Don't you ever sleep?" "Sleep's overrated," he replied, but his eyes held hers a beat longer than necessary before he headed out. Alone again, Nova packed up, Dylan's words. "You were never meant for someone like him," echoing faintly. She shook them off, locking the office behind her. She was done letting him haunt her. Knox's faith in her work, her strength, was a lifeline she hadn't known she needed. But as she rode the elevator down, a new question tugged at her. Was this just business or something more? The next morning she arrived to a flurry of emails and a cryptic note on her desk. "My office, 10 a.m. KS." Her stomach flipped, a mix of nerves and curiosity. At 10 sharp, she stepped into his glass-walled domain, finding him behind his desk, a stack of papers in hand. "Sit," he said, not looking up. "Your presentation last week, the raw luxury pitch, it stuck with me." She settled into the chair, clutching her tablet. "Good stuck or bad stuck?" He glanced up, his gaze piercing. "Good. You've got a voice in there, unpolished, real. I want to build on it." Her chest warmed, pride battling the unease of his scrutiny. "Thanks. I didn't think it was that big a deal." "It was," he said, leaning back. "Most people here play it safe. You don't. That's why I'm inviting you to dinner." Nova blinked, caught off guard. "Dinner?" "Tonight," he clarified, his tone casual but firm. Private spot, downtown. We'll hash out the next steps for this. 7 work for you?" Her mind raced. Business or bait? His face gave nothing away, just that steady, unreadable calm. "Yeah," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "7's fine." "Good." He returned to his papers, dismissing her without another word. She left, her pulse thudding, questions piling up. A dinner with Knox Sterling wasn't just a meeting. It was a move. That evening she stood before her mirror, smoothing the lines of a deep blue dress. Simple, elegant, hers. No emerald gowns to impress, no echoes of Dylan's demands. Just Nova. She arrived at the restaurant, a sleek, hidden gem tucked behind ivy-covered walls, to find Knox already there, seated at a corner table, a glass of red wine in hand. The space was intimate, all low light and hushed tones, the kind of place that whispered power. He stood as she approached, his eyes sweeping over her, not predatory but appraising. "You're punctual," he said, pulling out her chair. "I like that." "Habit," she replied, sitting, her nerves buzzing. "You?" "Control," he said, a faint smirk tugging his lips as he settled across from her. "Wine?" She nodded, and he poured, the ruby liquid catching the light. The waiter vanished after taking their orders, grilled salmon for her, steak for him, and the silence stretched, heavy with unspoken stakes. "So," she said, sipping the wine, its warmth loosening her edges. "The presentation. What's the plan?" Knox leaned forward, elbows on the table, his intensity locking her in. "It's not just the plan, it's you. The way you think, sharp, unfiltered. I want that in this campaign. No fluff, no fakery, just the core of it." She set her glass down, his words sinking in. "You're betting a lot on me. Why?" "Because you're worth it," he said simply, his gaze unwavering. "You don't see it yet, but I do." Her breath hitched, the compliment rawer than she'd expected. She looked away, focusing on the flicker of the candle between them, but his voice pulled her back. "You're not like the others here," he continued, softer now. "You don't hide behind polish or pretense. It's natural. Beautiful, even." The word, beautiful, landed like a spark, igniting something she hadn't felt in months. She met his eyes, searching for a catch, but found only that quiet, piercing clarity. "You don't strike me as the type to throw compliments around," she said, her tone teasing but cautious. "I'm not," he replied, leaning back, a faint smile playing at his lips. "I say what I mean, always." The air thickened, charged with a current she couldn't ignore. Their food arrived, breaking the moment, and they slipped into easier talk. Design, ambition, the campaign's edges. But beneath it, something built. His hand brushed hers as he passed the bread, a fleeting touch that lingered in her skin. His laugh, rare and low, rumbled when she quipped about a client's garish taste. And his eyes, God, those eyes, held hers too long, too deep, peeling back layers she'd buried. "You're good at this," he said later, over coffee, the restaurant emptying around them. "Not just the work, the way you carry yourself. It's compelling." She smiled, small but real. "You're not so bad yourself. For a CEO, anyway." He chuckled, a sound that warmed her more than the wine. High praise. They lingered, the conversation drifting from business to fragments of their lives, his late nights, her love of sketching in the rain. She caught herself laughing, relaxing, the weight of Dylan's betrayal fading in the glow of this strange, unexpected night. Knox watched her, not with the cold calculation she'd first seen, but with something softer, hungrier. As they stepped outside, the city air cool against her flushed cheeks, he paused by the curb. "This wasn't just about the presentation," he admitted, his voice low, unguarded. "I wanted to see you, outside the office, the real you." Her heart stuttered, caught between thrill and doubt. "And what do you see?" He stepped closer, close enough to feel his warmth. "Someone who doesn't need to prove anything." but does anyway. She held his gaze, the world narrowing to this moment, the ivy rustling, the distant hum of traffic, the pull between them. "Careful, Knox," she said, her voice steady despite the rush. "I might start thinking you're human." He smirked, but his eyes softened. "Maybe I am. Around you." A car pulled up, his driver, and he opened the door for her. "Get home safe," he said, his hand brushing her arm as she slid inside. "We'll talk soon." The door closed and the car pulled away, leaving her staring at his silhouette through the tinted glass. Her mind spun. Chemistry, yes, but questions too. Was this real or a play in his billionaire game? Dylan's warning echoed faintly. "He'll chew you up," but Knox's words drowned it out. Beautiful, compelling, worth it. She leaned back, the city lights streaking past, and felt the shift. Whatever this was, spark, strategy, or something more, she wasn't the same woman Dylan had broken. And Knox, for better or worse, was part of why. Nova sank into the car's leather seat, the city lights streaking past as Knox's silhouette faded into the night. His parting words, "Maybe I am, around you," echoed in her mind, a quiet jolt that lingered like the brush of his hand on her arm. The dinner had shifted something, a crack in the armor she'd built since Dylan's betrayal. Knox saw her, really saw her, not as a broken piece to fix or a trophy to claim, but as herself. It was intoxicating, unnerving, and she wasn't sure what to do with it. The driver dropped her at her apartment and she climbed the stairs in a daze, replaying the night. His smirk over coffee, the way his voice softened when he said, "Beautiful," the heat of his gaze. She kicked off her shoes, collapsing onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling. Was this chemistry real, or just another layer of his game? She'd caught the hunger in his eyes, but Knox Sterling wasn't a man who stumbled into vulnerability. Every move he made felt deliberate, except tonight when the edges of his control had frayed. Sleep came fitfully, tangled with dreams of rooftops and dark eyes. The next day at the office, she threw herself into work, sketching with a ferocity that surprised even Lila. Knox didn't appear, no desk visits, no cryptic notes, and the absence gnawed at her. Had she misread him? By Friday, the silence stretched too thin, and she found herself lingering late, tweaking a layout she'd already perfected. Her phone buzzed, Yasmin checking in. "You alive?" the text read. Nova smiled, typing back, "Barely." Long story. She'd tell her about the dinner later, when she could untangle it herself. A shadow fell across her desk. She looked up, heart tripping, to find Knox standing there, coatless, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hair was slightly mussed, a rare crack in his polished exterior. "Thought you'd be here," he said, his voice low, carrying that familiar edge. "Burning the midnight oil again?" "Habit," she replied, setting her pen down. "You?" He didn't answer, just pulled up a chair and sat, his gaze sweeping her cluttered desk. "That dinner," he started, then paused like he was choosing his words. "It wasn't just about the campaign." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "You said that already." "What's the rest?" He exhaled, a sharp sound, and for the first time she saw something raw flicker across his face, something unguarded. "I don't do this," he said, gesturing vaguely between them. "Open up. But you're different." Her pulse quickened, curiosity warring with caution. "Different how?" Knox leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes locking hers in a grip she couldn't break. "I learned a long time ago to measure people by how they handle silence, not how loud they shine. Most can't stand it, fill it with noise, flash anything to avoid the truth. You don't. You sit with it. Own it." Nova's breath caught, his words slicing through her defenses. "So you noticed my silence?" He nodded, a faint smirk tugging his lips. Hard not to. It's louder than most people's screams. She stared at him, the weight of his scrutiny sinking in. He wasn't just talking about her work, her designs. This was personal, a thread pulled from somewhere deeper. Why does that matter to you? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside. He hesitated, then leaned back, his gaze drifting to the window where the city glowed restless and bright. Because I've been burned by the loud ones. Years ago, Fiancé, she was all glitter, all charm. Everyone loved her. I thought I did too. Nova's chest tightened, sensing the shift. What happened? She left, he said, his tone flat but laced with an old ache. Publicly. Dragged me through the mud at some gala. Said I was too focused, too cold, not enough for her. Then she ran off with a hedge fund guy who flashed more cash and fewer hours. Left me standing there, the room gawking, while she laughed her way out. He paused, his jaw tightening, and Nova saw it, the flicker of humiliation, buried but not gone. I was younger, dumber, thought love was about the show. Took me too long to figure out she was just superficiality wrapped in a pretty dress. After that, I swore I'd never waste time on anyone who couldn't stand the quiet. The confession hung there, raw and unguarded, a piece of Knox she hadn't expected. She swallowed, her mind racing to connect it to the man before her, the billionaire, the enigma, the one who'd seen her when she'd felt invisible. So you hate the shallow stuff, she said, piecing it together. The polish, the pretense. He nodded, his eyes snapping back to hers. Hate it. It's why I keep pushing you. You're not that. You're real. The word landed like a spark, echoing his compliment from the dinner. Beautiful, compelling, real. Her throat tightened, emotions swelling she couldn't name. I didn't think anyone noticed, she admitted, her voice softer now. Not after everything. Dylan, he said, not a question, and she flinched, the name a trigger she couldn't dodge. Yeah, she murmured, looking down at her hands. He made me feel like silence was a flaw, like I wasn't enough because I didn't shout. Knox's gaze hardened, but not at her. He's an idiot. Silence isn't weakness, it's strength, knowing who you are without needing the world to clap for it. He couldn't handle that. I can. Her eyes flicked up, meeting his, and there it was again. That pull, stronger now, laced with a shared wound. You're not what I expected, she said, a half smile tugging her lips. For a CEO, anyway. He chuckled, low and warm. You're not what I expected either. For anyone. The air shifted, thick with something new. Trust, maybe, or the edge of it. He stood, stepping closer to her desk, and picked up one of her sketches, studying it like it held answers. This, he said, tapping the paper. It's you. No noise, just truth. That's what I want in this campaign. And out of it. She rose, drawn by his words, and stood beside him, their shoulders nearly brushing. And what's out of it mean? He turned, his face inches from hers, his voice dropping. Whatever you want it to. I'm not here to push, just to see. Her heart thudded, the closeness dizzying. She saw the man behind the mask now, the one who'd been broken too, who'd rebuilt himself in silence. And he saw her, the real her, not the shell Dylan had left behind. It was terrifying, exhilarating, a trigger unlocking something she'd buried. I don't know what I want, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Not yet. He nodded, no judgment, just understanding. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. He set the sketch down, his hand lingering near hers, and for a moment she thought he might close the gap. But he stepped back, grabbing his coat. Get some rest, he said, his smirk returning. You've earned it. He left, the door clicking shut, and Nova sank back into her chair, her mind spinning. Knox's past, his hate for the superficial, his faith in her. It wove into her own scars, Dylan's rejection, her quiet fight to rise. The triggers were there, but so was the spark, and it burned brighter now. She stared at the sketch, her reflection faint in the window beyond. Someone saw her, really saw her, when no one else had. And as the city pulsed outside, she felt the shift. This wasn't just about healing anymore, it was about claiming what came next, on her terms. Have you ever felt someone saw the real you when no one else did? Share your experience below. Nova sat at her desk, the sketch still resting where Knox had left it, his words, "I'm not going anywhere," ringing in her ears. The office was silent now, the hum of the city a distant pulse beyond the glass. She traced the lines of her design, her fingers lingering where his had been, and felt the weight of the night settle into her. His confession, his fiancé's betrayal, his disdain for the superficial, had cracked something open, a mirror to her own wounds. Dylan had crushed her for not fitting his mold. Knox saw her silence as strength. The contrast burned, a quiet fire she couldn't extinguish. She packed up slowly, her mind tangled in the push and pull of it all. Knox's trust, his closeness, it was a lifeline, but it came with questions. What did he want from her, really? And what did she want from him? She locked the office and headed home, the cool night air biting at her skin as she replayed his smirk, his steady gaze. Sleep came easier this time, though her dreams were restless, shadows of rooftops, Knox's voice, Dylan's sneer weaving in and out. The next morning she arrived at the firm with a renewed edge, diving into her work with a focus that startled Lila. "You're on fire today," her co-worker said, peering over her shoulder at a bold new sketch. Nova just smiled, the spark from Knox's faith fueling her. He didn't appear that day, but his presence lingered in the project notes he'd emailed, sharp, precise, pushing her to dig deeper. She thrived on it, the quiet rhythm of their collaboration steadying her. By midweek, she was in the break room, pouring coffee, when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She frowned, opening the text, and her stomach dropped. A photo stared back. Her, years ago, heavier, softer, caught mid-laugh at a beach party. Her hair was wild, her swimsuit bright, her smile unguarded. Another text followed. "Remember this?" "I do. Wonder what Sterling would think." Dylan. Her hands shook, the coffee sloshing as she set the mug down. She'd deleted those photos, scrubbed them from her life after he'd mocked her weight gain. How did he have this? And why now? A third message pinged. "Meet me. 6 p.m., old spot. Or these go public." Her breath hitched, panic clawing at her chest. The old spot, a dive bar they'd frequented early in their relationship, a place she'd once loved. She could see his game, humiliate her again, drag her back into his orbit, use her past to break her present. She gripped the counter, forcing herself to breathe. Number. She wouldn't let him win. She didn't tell Yasmin. Her sister would storm in, fists flying, and make it worse. She didn't tell Knox either, not yet. This was hers to face. At 6, she walked into the bar, the familiar scent of stale beer and fried food hitting her like a memory she'd rather forget. Dylan sat in a corner booth, nursing a whiskey, his smirk sharp as ever. "You came," he said, leaning back, his eyes raking over her. "Didn't think you would." "What do you want?" she demanded, standing stiffly, refusing to sit. He slid his phone across the table, the screen glowing with more photos. Her at a picnic, a pool day, moments she'd trusted him to capture. "These," he said, tapping the glass. "Cute, right? Bet your new boyfriend hasn't seen this side of you." Her jaw tightened, rage simmering beneath her fear. "You're pathetic, Dylan. What's the point?" "The point," he said, his voice dropping, is you don't get to walk away and land some billionaire like it's nothing. I made you, Nova, and I can unmake you. These hit the internet and your little fairy tale's over." She stared at him, the man she'd once loved, now a stranger, wielding her past like a weapon. "You didn't make me," she said, her voice low and firm. "You broke me, and I rebuilt myself without you." He laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "Sure, keep telling yourself that. But Sterling, he'll drop you faster than I did once he sees these. You're not his type. Too real, too messy." The word stung, a trigger to her old insecurities, but she held her ground. "You don't know him. Or me." Dylan leaned forward, his smirk twisting. "I know enough. Last chance. Come back to me, or I hit send." Before she could answer, a shadow loomed behind her. She turned, startled, to find Knox stepping into the booth's dim light, his presence a quiet storm. His coat was off, sleeves rolled up, but his calm was lethal, his eyes locked on Dylan with an intensity that made the air crackle. "Reed," Knox said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "You're out of your depth." Dylan's smirk faltered, but he recovered, leaning back with forced ease. "Sterling, didn't expect you to slum it here. This is between me and her." "No," Knox said, stepping closer, his shadow swallowing Dylan's bravado. "It's between you and me now. You'll be jobless before sunrise if you try this. She's under my protection." Nova's breath caught, her pulse racing as Knox's words sank in. Dylan's eyes narrowed, a flicker of doubt breaking through his mask. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice wavered. "Test me," Knox replied, his tone flat, unyielding. "I've got calls queued up. Your investors, your board, your little startup's lifeline. One word and it's ash. Delete the photos. Now." Dylan hesitated, his fingers hovering over his phone, then swiped at the screen, his jaw tight. "Done," he muttered, shoving the device into his pocket. "You're both delusional if you think this lasts." Knox didn't flinch. "Walk away, Reed. You're done here." Dylan stood, his glare shifting between them, then stormed out, the door banging shut behind him. Nova exhaled, her knees weak, but she stayed upright, Knox's presence a steady wall beside her. "You didn't have to do that," she said, turning to him, her voice shaky but grateful. "Yeah, I did," he replied, his gaze softening as it met hers. "He doesn't get to touch you, not your past, not your present, not while I'm around." She swallowed, the weight of his protection sinking in. "How did you know I was here?" "Saw you leave," he said, shrugging faintly. "Looked off. Followed my gut." Her chest warmed, a mix of relief and something deeper, trust maybe, or the edge of it. "Thanks," she murmured, her eyes dropping to the floor, then back to him. "I thought I could handle it." "You did," he said, stepping closer, his voice low. "I just finished it." She nodded, the bar's dim light casting his face in sharp relief, strong jaw, steady eyes, a man who'd bared his own scars to her and now stood in hers. Dylan's threat was gone, but the trigger lingered. Those photos, her old self, the fear of being seen as less. Yet Knox hadn't blinked, hadn't judged. "You're not what he thinks," Knox said, reading her silence. "Or what you think he made you. You're more." She met his gaze, the fire from their last talk flaring again. "And you're not what I thought either." He smirked, a flicker of warmth breaking his calm. "Good. Keeps things interesting." They stepped outside, the night air cool against her flushed skin, and he walked her to her car, his hand brushing hers as they paused. "Get home safe," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We'll talk tomorrow." She nodded, sliding into the driver's seat, and watched him walk away, his silhouette sharp against the city glow. Dylan's threat was dust, but the stakes had risen. Knox's power, his quiet claim, her own shifting ground. She gripped the wheel, her mind racing. This wasn't just about protection. It was about what came next and who she'd be when it did. Nova drove home through the city's restless glow, her hands steady on the wheel despite the tremor in her chest. Knox's voice, "She's under my protection now," looped in her mind, a shield against the sting of Dylan's threat. The photos were gone, deleted under Knox's unflinching gaze, but the echo of her past lingered, a quiet bruise she couldn't ignore. She parked, climbed the stairs to her apartment, and sank onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. Knox hadn't just saved her tonight. He'd seen her, stood for her, in a way no one ever had. It shifted the ground beneath her, a fault line she couldn't unfeel. The next day at the office, he found her at her desk, his presence quieter than usual, his coat slung over his arm. "You good?" he asked, his eyes searching hers with that piercing clarity. "Yeah," she said, managing a small smile. "Better anyway, thanks to you." He nodded, setting a folder down. "Good. Got something for you. Charity event, weekend after next. Upstate. I need you there." She raised an eyebrow, opening the folder. Details for a gala, black tie, raising funds for a youth arts program. "Need me for what?" "Design input," he said, leaning against her desk. "You'll pitch some concepts, mingle with donors. Plus, I could use the company." Her pulse quickened, caught by the casual weight of his words. "Company?" He smirked, a flicker of warmth breaking his cool. "Yeah, you're not bad to have around." She laughed, soft but real, and nodded. "Okay, I'm in." The days blurred after that, her work fueled by a new edge, Knox's faith, her own rising strength. Dylan's shadow faded, his threat a hollow memory against Knox's quiet power. When the weekend arrived, she packed a sleek black gown and drove upstate with him, the city giving way to rolling hills and crisp air. The venue was a grand estate, all stone and glass, buzzing with wealthy guests in tailored suits and glittering dresses. Knox stayed close during the event, his hand brushing her back as he introduced her to donors, his voice steady as she pitched her ideas, scholarships, workshops, art as healing. The crowd loved her, their nods and murmurs a balm to her nerves. Afterward, as the gala wound down, he caught her by the terrace, a glass of bourbon in his hand. "You killed it," he said, his gaze warm under the string lights. "They're eating out of your hand." She smiled, leaning against the railing. "Team effort. You set the stage." He stepped closer, the night air cool between them. "Maybe, but you're the one they'll remember." The compliment sank in, stirring that familiar spark. They lingered there, the crowd fading to a hum, until he tilted his head toward the estate. "Rooms are upstairs. Stay the night. We'll head back tomorrow." She nodded, her throat tight with anticipation, and followed him inside. Their suites were adjacent, connected by a shared balcony overlooking the hills. She changed into a soft sweater and jeans, her gown discarded, and stepped outside to find him already there, bourbon in hand, staring at the moonlit valley. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, settling beside him. "Never do after these things," he said, offering her the glass. She took a sip, the burn grounding her, and handed it back. "Too much noise?" she teased, echoing his words about silence. He chuckled, low and warm. "Something like that." "You?" "Too much quiet," she admitted, her voice softer now. "Leaves room for thinking." He turned, his eyes locking hers, and the air shifted. Thicker, heavier. "What about?" She hesitated, then let it spill. "You, me. How you saw me last night, when I couldn't see myself." His gaze softened, a crack in his usual steel. "I see you every time, Nova. Always have." The words hit her, raw and real, and she felt the walls she'd built, since Dylan, since the rooftop, tremble. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" He set the glass down, stepping closer, his breath brushing her skin. Because you're not pretending. Not with me. Not with anyone. I've spent years dodging masks, mine included. You don't wear one. Her chest tightened, years of pain and doubt surging up, but his closeness steadied her. Neither do you, she said, meeting his eyes. Not anymore. He reached out, his hand cupping her face, thumb tracing her cheek. No, he murmured, not with you. The space between them dissolved, and he kissed her. Slow, deliberate, a question answered. She melted into it, her hands finding his chest, the warmth of him unraveling her last defenses. They moved inside, the balcony door clicking shut, and the world narrowed to this, them. Here, now. He guided her to his room, the bed a quiet promise beneath dim light. Their clothes fell away, piece by piece, not rushed but reverent, each touch peeling back layers of hurt. His hands roamed her skin, her curves, her scars, mapping her with a care that broke her open. She traced his jaw, his shoulders, feeling the tension he'd carried for years, the weight of his own betrayal. When he entered her, it was slow, intense, a merging that went beyond flesh. Their breaths synced, ragged and real, every movement a release of Dylan's cruelty, of his fiancé's abandonment, of the silence they'd both endured. He held her gaze, his eyes dark with something deeper than desire, trust, need, a shared unraveling. She clung to him, her fingers digging into his back, letting go of the pain she'd buried, the shame she'd worn like a second skin. It wasn't just heat. It was connection, raw and unfiltered, years of guarded walls crumbling in the quiet between them. He whispered her name, a sound that anchored her, and she felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from the weight of being seen, fully, finally. His lips found hers again, softer now, and they moved together, steady, deliberate, until the release came. Not a crash, but a wave, washing away the past. After, they lay tangled in the sheets, her head on his chest, his heartbeat a steady rhythm beneath her ear. His fingers traced lazy circles on her arm, and she felt the shift. Intimacy, real and unguarded, a bond forged in the quiet they both understood. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough with the aftermath. She nodded, lifting her head to meet his eyes. "More than okay. You?" He smirked, but it softened into something real. "Yeah, first time in a while." She smiled, resting her chin on his chest. "Me too." They stayed like that, the night stretching out, the charity event a distant memory. His hand found hers, lacing their fingers, and she felt the truth settle in. This wasn't just a moment. It was a beginning, fragile but fierce, built on the ruins of their pasts. Outside, the hills slept under the moon, but inside, the air hummed with what they'd shared, pain released, walls broken, a connection neither could deny. And as sleep crept in, Nova knew the stakes had changed again. Dylan was gone, his threats dust, but this, with Knox, was alive, unpredictable, and hers to claim. Nova woke to the soft rhythm of Knox's breathing, her cheek pressed against his chest, the warmth of him a quiet anchor in the morning light. The sheets tangled around them, a testament to the night they'd shared. Slow, intense, a breaking of walls that left her raw but whole. She traced the lines of his arm, feeling the steady pulse beneath his skin, and marveled at the shift. This wasn't just release. It was trust, a connection forged in the silence they'd both learned to carry. His hand tightened around hers, even in sleep, and she smiled, a fragile peace settling over her. The weekend stretched out, a stolen slice of time away from the city's chaos. They lingered at the estate after the charity event, skipping the formal brunch to wander the grounds instead. He tugged her toward a wooded trail, his laugh low and unguarded as she stumbled over roots, her hand firm in his. They talked, about his late father's gruff lessons, her childhood sketching in the rain. Bits of themselves traded like treasures. By Sunday, driving back in his sleek car, the air between them hummed with something new, unspoken but real. Back at the firm, the week began with a quiet rhythm, shared glances across meeting rooms, late-night revisions at her desk with his voice in her ear, steady and sure. She caught herself smiling more, the weight of Dylan's betrayal a fading scar against the strength she'd found with Knox. He didn't push, didn't demand, just stayed, close, constant, a partner in ways she hadn't known she needed. Then Thursday hit like a storm. She was at her desk, tweaking a campaign layout, when Lila burst in, her face pale. "Nova, you need to see this, now." Lila shoved her phone under Nova's nose, a gossip site glaring back. Billionaire CEO Knox Sterling caught in steamy affair with employee. Photos followed, grainy but unmistakable, Knox pulling her close on the estate balcony, their kiss by the trail, her hand in his as they left the gala. Her stomach dropped, the coffee she'd sipped turning to acid. "How?" she whispered, scrolling, each image a punch to her gut. "Doesn't matter how," Lila said, her voice tight. "It's everywhere, Twitter, Insta, the internal Slacks blowing up. People are pissed." Nova's hands shook as she opened her laptop, the firm's email flooding with threads. Favoritism at the top. Sleeping her way up? The accusations sharp and relentless. Her chest tightened, panic clawing at her throat. This wasn't just gossip. It was a blade to Knox's empire, her career, the fragile thing they'd built. She stormed to his office, the glass walls a cruel spotlight as heads turned, whispers trailing her. He was there, standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his jaw set like stone. He hung up as she entered, his eyes meeting hers, calm but shadowed. "You saw," he said, not a question. "Yeah," she replied, her voice trembling despite her effort. "Knox, this is bad. They're saying you're playing favorites, that I'm some opportunist." He stepped closer, his hands in his pockets, unshaken. "Let them say it. It's noise." "Noise?" She laughed, sharp and brittle. "It's your company, your name. I won't let you destroy it for me." His gaze hardened, but not at her, just the world beyond the glass. "You think I care about that? You're the only thing that makes my name mean something." The words hit her, raw and fierce, and she faltered, caught between fear and the pull of him. "Knox, they'll tear you apart. The board, the investors, they're already circling. I saw the emails. I can't be the reason you lose everything." "You're not," he said, closing the gap, his hands finding her arms, steadying her. "This isn't on you. Someone leaked this. Someone with a grudge." Her mind flashed to Dylan, his smirk, his threat about the photos, his jealousy. "You think it's him?" "Maybe," Knox said, his voice low, controlled fury simmering beneath it. "Doesn't matter who. I'll handle it." She pulled back, shaking her head. I'll handle it. I'll resign. Step away before this gets worse." His grip tightened, not painful but firm, his eyes blazing. "You're not running. Not from this, not from me." "Knox," she started, but he cut her off, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've lost enough to cowards who wield shame like a weapon. I won't lose you too. We face this, together." Her breath hitched, tears pricking her eyes, not from defeat, but from the weight of his resolve, his faith. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay, together." He pulled her into him, his arms a quiet fortress, and she clung to him, the storm outside raging on. The office buzzed beyond the glass, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the scandal spreading like wildfire. She buried her face in his chest, breathing him in, and felt the shift. This wasn't just about photos or gossip, it was a test, a crack in their foundation, and they'd either break or build stronger. Hours later, he called a meeting. Senior staff, board members, a room thick with tension. Nova stood by his side, her chin high despite the stares. He didn't flinch, his voice steady as he addressed them. "Photos leaked," he said, hands clasped behind him. "Personal, irrelevant. What matters is the work, Nova's talent, her results. You've seen the numbers, the campaigns. That's what we stand on. Questions?" A board member, gray-haired and stern, leaned forward. "Knox, this looks bad. Favoritism, ethics. Investors are rattled." "Then unrattle them," Knox shot back, his tone cold but unshaken. "She's earned her place 10 times over. If you can't see that, you're blind." Murmurs rippled, but no one pushed. Nova spoke up, her voice clear despite the knot in her throat. "I'll step back if it protects the firm, but I won't apologize for my work. Or for this." The room stilled, her defiance a quiet echo of Knox's strength. They adjourned, the tension unresolved, but the line drawn. Back in his office, alone, he turned to her, his smirk faint but real. "You didn't have to do that," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah, I did," she replied, echoing his words from the bar. "You're not fighting this alone." He kissed her then, soft but fierce, a promise sealed in the chaos. The scandal wasn't over. Dylan's hand or not, the fallout loomed, but they stood in it, unbowed. She pulled back, meeting his eyes, and saw the man who'd broken her walls, who'd claimed her silence as strength. "Whoever did this," she said, her voice steady now, "they don't know what they're up against." He nodded, his hand finding hers, lacing their fingers. "Number they don't." The city glowed beyond the glass, restless and waiting, but inside they held firm. The photos were a weapon, the accusations a storm, but this, them, was real, forged in fire. And as the night deepened, Nova knew the fight wasn't done. The scandal was a crack, but what came next would define them. Together. Nova stood in Knox's office, her hand still clasped in his, the city's restless glow framing them against the glass. The scandal's echo lingered, those photos, the accusations of favoritism, the board's cold scrutiny. But his kiss had grounded her, a fierce tether in the storm. She pulled back, her breath steadying, and met his eyes, seeing the man who'd stood with her, unyielding against the chaos. The fight wasn't over. Whispers still snaked through the firm. Investors wavered. But they'd drawn a line. Together. He brushed his thumb across her knuckles, his smirk faint but steady. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice low, a promise carved in steel. She nodded, squeezing his hand. "Yeah, we will." The next day blurred with damage control, Knox on calls with investors, Nova fielding emails from her team, their rhythm a quiet defiance. She caught the sidelong glances, the hushed tones in the break room, but held her head high, her work sharper than ever. By evening he found her at her desk, his coat slung over his shoulder, a flicker of exhaustion in his eyes. "Home," he said, not a question, and she followed. The drive to his penthouse silent but charged. They cooked together. Pasta, simple, his sleeves rolled up as he stirred sauce, her chopping garlic with a focus that eased her nerves. They ate on his couch, the city sprawling below, and she felt the weight lift just for a moment. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. "Camila," he muttered, answering. "Yeah, what's up?" Nova watched, her fork paused, as his expression shifted. Surprise, then a slow, sharp grin. He hung up, turning to her. "My sister's got something. Says it's big. Wants us at her place. Now." "Camilla?" Nova asked, her pulse quickening. She'd met Knox's younger sister once, a whirlwind of energy, sharp-tongued and fiercely loyal, at a company event. "What's she got?" "Dunno," he said, standing grabbing his keys. "But she doesn't call like that unless it's worth it." They drove to Camilla's loft, a sleek space downtown cluttered with art and tech gadgets. She greeted them at the door, her dark hair pulled back, eyes blazing with a mix of triumph and fury. "Get in here," she said, waving them to a laptop on her coffee table. "You're gonna love this." Knox sank onto the couch beside Nova, his arm brushing hers, as Camilla pulled up a screen. Email threads, timestamps, a digital trail laid bare. "Dylan," Camilla said, pointing. "That bastard leaked the photos. Traced it back to his IP, some shady burner account he thought he'd covered. Idiot didn't count on me." Nova's stomach twisted, rage flaring hot and fast. "Him," she breathed, the pieces clicking, his jealousy, his threats, his slimy return. "I knew it." Knox's hand tightened on her knee, his voice low, lethal. "He's done." "Already halfway there," Camilla said, smirking. "I've got a contact at his startup, disgruntled VP, hates his guts. Fed me his login, his chats. Look at this." She scrolled to a message. "Sterling's girl gets what's coming. Post it Friday." Dated right before the leak hit. Nova stared, her fists clenching. "He wanted to bury me." "And me," Knox added, his eyes narrowing. "Two birds, one stone." Camilla leaned back, crossing her arms. "So I've got a plan. We don't just expose him, we ruin him. I've got his whole digital footprint. Emails, deals, dirt. One push and it's front-page news. His board'll ditch him faster than a sinking ship." Knox glanced at Nova, his gaze steady. "Your call. He hurt you most." She swallowed, the weight of it sinking in. Dylan's betrayal, now a weapon in her hands. "Do it," she said, her voice firm. "End him." Camilla grinned, cracking her knuckles. "My pleasure." The next morning, the story broke. Headlines screaming, "Tech exec caught in revenge leak." Dylan's name plastered across every outlet, his startup's stock tanking by noon. Nova watched it unfold from her desk, a quiet satisfaction settling over her as his empire crumbled. Knox stayed close, his presence a steady hum, and by afternoon the firm's internal chatter shifted. Less about favoritism, more about her resilience, his leadership. That evening he called her to his office, the glass walls a shield against the fading buzz. He stood by his desk, hands in his pockets, a rare softness in his eyes. "Camilla's a force," he said, "but you're the one who held it together." She smiled, stepping closer. "Team effort. You didn't let me fall." He nodded, then pulled a folder from his desk, sliding it to her. "Got something else. Open it." She did, her breath catching. A proposal, bold and new. Director of Women's Empowerment Initiative. Her eyes scanned the details. Mentorship, design programs, a platform to lift others, all under her lead. "Knox, this." "Your idea," he cut in, his voice steady. "From the gala pitch. I ran it by the board today. They're in unanimous. Scandal's dust now. This is the future. You want it?" Her chest swelled, pride and purpose colliding. "Director," she said, testing the word, her voice thick. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," he replied, stepping around the desk, close enough to feel his warmth. "You've earned it, your work, your fight. Say yes." She looked up, meeting his eyes, steady, fierce, the man who'd seen her through the wreckage. "Yes," she said, a grin breaking free. "Hell yes." He smirked, pulling her into him, his lips finding hers in a kiss that sealed it, sharp, real, a promise kept. She melted into him, her hands on his chest, the folder crinkling between them. When they parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Dylan's gone," he murmured. "This is ours now." She nodded, the weight of the past lifting, replaced by something solid. Her role, their bond, a future she'd shape. "Ours," she echoed, her voice steady, strong. They stood there, the city pulsing beyond the glass, as Camilla's plan played out. Dylan's ruin complete, Nova's rise begun. The scandal had cracked them open, but this, her new title, his quiet faith, mended it, forging something unbreakable. And as the night deepened, she knew the loops weren't closed yet. New challenges loomed, new fights. But with Knox beside her, she was ready. Nova leaned into Knox's embrace, the folder crinkling between them as their kiss lingered, a quiet seal on her new role, Director of Women's Empowerment Initiative. The office hummed beyond the glass, but in here it was just them. The city's glow framing his steady gaze, her heartbeat syncing with his. Dylan's ruin was complete, Camilla's plan a masterstroke, and this moment, her rise, their bond, felt like a victory carved from the wreckage. She pulled back, her grin wide, and he brushed a thumb across her cheek, his smirk softening into something real. "Director," he said, testing the word, his voice low and warm. "Suits you." "Feels right," she replied, stepping back to smooth the folder, her fingers tracing the title. "More than I thought it would." He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Good. You've got a week to settle in, then we're rolling it out. Big panel, press, the works." Her pulse quickened, a mix of nerves and thrill. "Never do," he said, his eyes glinting. "Not with you." The days that followed were a whirlwind, meetings with her new team, drafting plans for mentorship programs, sketching a vision that felt like her own. Knox stayed close, his input sharp but trusting, their late nights blurring work and something deeper. She caught herself laughing more, her shoulders lighter, Dylan's shadow a faint memory against the strength she'd claimed. Yasmin texted daily, "Proud of you, sis." And Camilla dropped by once, smirking over coffee. "Told you I'd bury him," she said, and Nova hugged her, grateful for the fierce ally she'd gained. By the time the panel rolled around, a high-profile event on workplace equity at a sleek downtown venue, Nova felt ready, her nerves tempered by purpose. She stood backstage, smoothing her tailored blazer, the crowd's buzz filtering through the curtain. Knox had prepped her, key points, donor names, but he'd been quieter that morning, his usual calm edged with something she couldn't place. She brushed it off, focusing on her notes, until the moderator called her name. She stepped onto the stage, the lights bright, the room packed. Executives, journalists, faces she recognized from the firm. She took her seat beside two other panelists, a tech VP and a non-profit founder, and launched into it, her voice steady as she spoke about equity, empowerment, her new initiative. The crowd leaned in, nodding, her words landing with a weight she hadn't expected. Questions came, sharp, probing, and she met them head-on, her confidence growing with every answer. Then, halfway through, a ripple moved through the audience. She paused, mid-sentence, as heads turned. Knox stepped onto the stage, his suit crisp, his stride deliberate, a mic in hand. The moderator faltered, but Knox waved her off, his eyes locked on Nova. Her heart thudded, confusion spiking. What was he doing? He stopped beside her chair, the room falling silent, every eye on him. He raised the mic, his voice clear, steady, cutting through the hush. "I'm interrupting. Sorry. Not sorry. But this can't wait." A murmur spread, but he pressed on, turning to face her fully. "Nova, you've heard me talk about silence, how it shows who people are. I've spent years measuring it, guarding it, because I got burned by the noise. Then you walked in. You didn't just handle the quiet, you made it mean something. You changed how I see the world." Her breath caught, her hands gripping the armrests as the weight of his words sank in. The crowd faded, the lights dimmed to a blur. It was just him, his gaze fierce, unguarded. He stepped closer, dropping to one knee, and a gasp rippled through the room. Her eyes widened, a tear pricking as he pulled a small box from his pocket, flipping it open. A ring, simple, stunning, glinting under the stage lights. "Will you help me build a new one?" he said, his voice softening but firm. "With you as my wife." Time stopped. The room erupted, cheers, gasps, a few stunned claps, but Nova barely heard it. She stared at him, the man who'd seen her through betrayal, who'd fought for her, who'd broken his own walls to meet hers. Her chest swelled, emotion crashing over her. Love, yes, but more. Trust, strength, a future she hadn't dared dream. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking but clear, rising above the noise. "Yes, Knox." He grinned, wide, real, a crack in his steel, and slid the ring onto her finger, his hand trembling just enough to show the depth of it. She stood, pulling him up, and he kissed her. Deep, fierce, a claim sealed in front of everyone. The crowd roared, cameras flashing, but she clung to him. The world shrinking to this. Them, here, now. When they parted, breathless, he kept her close, his arm around her waist as the moderator scrambled to regain control. "Well," the woman laughed, "that's a first for this panel. Congratulations, you two." Nova smiled, her hand in his, the ring cool against her skin. They sat, him beside her now, unscripted, and finished the event, her voice steadier, his presence a quiet fire. Afterward, backstage, he pulled her into a corner, away from the chaos. "You planned that," she said, half laughing, half accusing, her eyes locked on his. "Guilty," he admitted, his smirk returning. "Couldn't wait. Needed them to see it. You, us." She shook her head, grinning. "You're insane." "For you," he said, kissing her again, softer this time, a promise in the quiet. "Always." The news spread fast, headlines shifting from scandal to celebration, the firm's stock ticking up, her initiative gaining traction overnight. Yasmin called, screaming with joy. Camilla texted a winking emoji. But for Nova, it was the moment on that stage, Knox's words, his knee on the floor, that anchored her. Dylan's betrayal, the photos, the pain. It was ash now, burned away by this, by him. They left the venue hand in hand, the city alive around them, and she felt the shift. Director, fiancé, a woman reclaimed. The ring glinted as they walked, a symbol of second chances, of love rebuilt from silence. And as they stepped into the night, she knew the loops weren't closed. Marriage, her role, their future loomed. But with Knox, she was ready to face them all. Nova stood in Knox's arms backstage, the echo of the crowd's cheers still ringing in her ears, the weight of the ring on her finger grounding her. His proposal, public, raw, unshakable, had flipped the script, turning scandal into celebration. She pressed her forehead to his, her breath mingling with his, and felt the world steady. "You're insane," she murmured again, her grin wide, unstoppable. "Worth it," he replied, his voice low, his hands firm on her waist. "You're worth it." They lingered there, the chaos of the panel fading, until staff ushered them out. Photos, handshakes, a blur of congratulations. The city buzzed around them as they left, her hand in his, the ring catching the streetlights. She glanced at him, his sharp jaw, his steady gaze, and knew this was real, a second chance carved from the ashes of her past. Dylan's betrayal, the leaked photos, the pain. It was dust now, swept away by Knox's faith, her own rise. The next morning, the news was everywhere. CEO's bold proposal steals the show. And the firm's halls hummed with a new energy. Her inbox flooded with support, her initiative gaining steam, and Knox stayed close, his quiet strength a constant. They planned fast, neither wanted to wait, and within weeks the wedding loomed, a promise she felt in her bones. But first, she saw him, Dylan. It was a chance glimpse outside a coffee shop near the firm, his suit rumpled, his face drawn. He stood alone, scrolling his phone, the headlines of his downfall still fresh, his startup gutted, his name a punchline. Their eyes met through the glass, and she froze, her coffee cup warm in her hands. He smirked, faint and bitter, but it crumbled under her steady gaze. She turned away, back to Knox, waiting at their table, and felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, just the weight of her own freedom. He was forgotten, a shadow sidelined by her light. The wedding came on a crisp spring day, elegant but simple, a rooftop venue, white flowers climbing the rails, the city sprawling below. Nova wore a gown she'd designed herself, flowing, soft, hugging her curves without apology, and Knox stood waiting, his suit sharp, his eyes locked on her as she walked the aisle. Yasmin stood beside her, beaming, her maid of honor fierce and proud. Camilla flanked Knox, her grin wicked and warm. The vows were quiet, real, his promise to see her, hers to stand with him, and when he kissed her, the small crowd cheered, a sound that felt like home. After, they danced, slow, close, his hand on her back, her head on his shoulder, and she felt the past melt away. No rooftops of humiliation, no threats of old photos, just this, them, a family built from resilience. Camila twirled Yasmin nearby, their laughter sharp and bright, and Nova caught Knox's eye, her smile mirroring his. Months later, she stood in a new office, her foundation's headquarters, a space alive with purpose. The Women's Empowerment Initiative had grown into something bigger, a body positivity foundation, her vision made real. She ran it with a fire she'd earned, mentoring young women, designing campaigns that celebrated every shape, every story. Knox backed her, his resources quiet but vast, and they thrived. Partners in love, in work, in healing. One evening they hosted a small dinner at their penthouse. Camila and Yasmin sprawled on the couch, wine glasses in hand, the city glowing beyond the windows. Nova leaned against Knox, his arm around her, and laughed as Camilla recounted Dylan's latest flop. A failed podcast, his voice drowned by irrelevance. "He's a ghost now," Camilla said, smirking. "Couldn't happen to a nicer guy." Yasmin raised her glass. "To Nova, kicking ass and taking names." "To all of us," Nova corrected, clinking her glass, her eyes sweeping the room, her sister, her friend, her husband. "We built this." Knox tightened his hold, his voice low in her ear. "You built it. I just got lucky enough to watch." She turned, kissing him softly, and the room erupted in mock groans. Camilla tossing a pillow, Yasmin fake gagging. But the laughter rolled on, warm and full, a sound born from pain turned to power. They ate, they talked, they lingered late, the city a quiet witness to their glow. Later, alone on their balcony, Nova stood with Knox, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. The ring glinted on her finger, her foundation's logo on a pin at her collar. A life reclaimed, a love rebuilt. Dylan watched from the sidelines, alone, forgotten, while she stood here, whole. She'd forgiven, not him but herself, for the years she'd doubted her worth. And with Knox, she'd found a love that didn't demand she shrink, a love that grew in the quiet. "You changed me too," she murmured, echoing his proposal. "This world, it's ours." He smiled, kissing her forehead. "Always." The night stretched out, the city alive below, and she felt it. The ending, yes, but also the beginning. A glow-up forged from resilience, a family stitched from scars, a love that held no conditions. And as they stood there, laughing voices drifting from inside, Nova knew she'd never dim again. What did this story teach you about self-worth, forgiveness, and true love? I'd love to hear your takeaway in the comments. Thank you for watching and being part of this growing community. See you in the next one.